Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So a few clips that are all interwoven on the same subject. The first one is the actress Miriam Margolyes, and she was talking about V-Day, but she also talked about conflict, humanity, Israel and Gaza. And I thought what she said, I don't usually put many celebrities on this, but I thought what she said was quite succinct. It was very, similar things that we talk about on the Pursuit of Truth. And I guess all of us are seeing, as countries, like she said, move towards the right, which is very worrying because we know that happened in the 1920s as well. And the dangers that come with that, the fact that she was talking about how history doesn't seem to have been, as a foreshadowing of things. It hasn't, been like a teaching lesson that we don't repeat the same mistakes, because it seems like we're repeating the same mistakes all the time, countrywide. And her stance on Israel and Gaza as a Jewish person, or born Jewish. I don't know if she practices faith or not. And it was interesting, like with that, the last Pursuit of Truth, where the bit from Double Down News where they talked about how when certain things are said, that they will always have a journalist interject with, the defence. That this was evident in this one. After that, it is the news of Israel attacking, is it 2 hospitals? I don't think there's any hospitals left, which was mentioned in the last one as well, about how hospitals have, the 36 hospitals have all been attacked. This was the European one, and I think the Nissa one. And then there was the talk, which is the bit I kept it for, was for Yemen, Israel going into, putting a warning out that they were going to launch bombs in Yemen. And what struck me is the fact that how certain countries are able to get away with, because like I've mentioned before, if you remember, I lived through the Iraq and Afghanistan, the wrangling they tried to get, the UN resolutions, the tenuous ways they got it, and, to try and justify, their 45-minute lie and the weapons of mass destruction lie to avenge 9/11. Whereas now it seems that doesn't seem necessary anymore, that now America and Israel and India and Pakistan in return are, and I'm sure Yemen and the Houthis and Palestinians, this idea of attacking other sovereign countries is now widespread. And, you can just say there's been a terrorist event, and your response can be that, well, I'm going to give you a warning, or I might not even give you a warning, like with Iran and Israel, and I'm just going to drop bombs in a different country. It's not an act of war, because in the past that would have been seen as an act of war. I'm just dropping bombs. I'm not even going to ask your permission. I'm just going to do it. And this is happening, like all those countries I've just listed in this last few years. And it shows how things are changing. And we don't have that same responsibility of needing, to have peace talks first or get UN resolutions or all this kind of stuff. We've seemed to have disbanded all that kind of rigmarole. And I was just thinking when I was watching it, imagine, because you don't hear, the West will often stand up for certain countries and say, oh, no, I condemn this, and, etc., for the countries that they're friends with. Which was mentioned in that Double Down News thing, which we all know about the hypocrisy when it comes to this kind of stuff. But what I was thinking of is imagine if, there was, France, someone from France had, done a terrorist event in England, and then, the English government, the UK government were to say, like, okay, France, we're giving you a warning of Paris, evacuate, we're going to drop bombs on there. And then we go and drop bombs on Paris. Could you imagine what would happen? Could you imagine the outcry? And as I'm saying it, I'm sure there's people like saying, but it's not the same and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, okay. Maybe with some countries, they try and make it out like whenever there's a Russian or Chinese involved in something, it's always state sponsored, even though I bet there's no kind of investigation to try and pinpoint, is it actually state sponsored? Or when there's a terrorist here, people can just do things of their own accord because they don't like certain countries. They may not be sponsored by, the actual governments of countries, but with certain countries, it's always seen that way. But what I'm interested in is that if that was to happen, you could imagine the outcry and, oh, that's so terrible, and the weeping for European lives that have been taken. But why isn't that the same when it comes to someone dropping a bomb on Yemen, or someone dropping a bomb like in India and Pakistan, or in Palestine, or wherever? Why is it that, the Double Down News mentioned this, why is it that certain countries, certain individuals' lives seem more important than others, yet what are we all? What is the intrinsic truth that we always forget, that I always bang on about on The Pursuit of Truth? We're all human beings. That is the intrinsic truth. All the rest is man-made concepts. This, you're this, you're from that, and this box, and etc., and this is your country, and all that kind of rubbish. That's all man-made stuff to keep us in those places and get us to fight each other, and about possession and greed, because that's how we were back then. But imagine, and that's what I was thinking as I was watching this, that, it's not even battering an eyelid. The journalist is just reading it out that, Israel's going to drop bombs on Yemen and they're giving them warning, and that's it. But if it was England going to drop bombs on France, it would be wall-to-wall 24-hour coverage of this, waiting for this event. And then there'd be memorials and concerts and all sorts of things. Something to think about, no? Why is that? What does that say about the nature of certain countries and how they pick on or appear like bullies on, they know that the big countries can drop bombs on the smaller ones because there's nothing they can do about it. It is a bit like, and I was thinking this when I started this, it's a bit like what happened in the schoolyard is just being replicated in world politics around the world. We're still those children. We haven't really grown up. And that's a shame, isn't it? And then the last one is, I think it's Tom Fletcher on the UN. I think it's the UK envoy or under something or other. But he's giving a speech about his going to visit hospitals in Gaza and talking about how, we just wrote bits of paper or stood up and, like that Father Ted thing where he says, down with this sort of thing, that's the kind of what politicians do these days. That's the as far as they're going to go to telling, and it's not just this event. Like I say, you could template this to lots of different wars and etc. and conflicts and the way we treat each other, not only just war within, our system that we live within. But it was just interesting to hear what he said and how shameful it is for humanity. That is just another example of another travesty, another atrocity that's being committed, not by aliens, not by God, not by animals, but by fellow brothers and sisters, by humans, by us. Take care, take it easy, God bless, and peace.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub highlights. Now, this week's commemorations were held across the country to mark VE Day, but the 80th anniversary of the end to war in Europe came as global tensions continued to rise, with no sign of a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, and two nuclear powers, India and Pakistan, in a military standoff. On Thursday, I spoke to the actress Miriam Margolyes, who was a young girl in 1945. Thank you so much for talking to us on the Politics Hub this evening. You were alive during VE Day. I know it was you were quite young, I think. Tell me if you remember anything about it.
I do remember quite a lot about it, which is mostly connected with sandwiches, because Mummy said that to celebrate Victory Day, she was going to make her famous sandwiches, cheese and tomato and onion and chicken and smoked salmon and all the rest of it. And it would be on a table outside our house in Oxford. And I was going to be lifted up to greet the buses, the number 2 bus that goes up the Banbury Road, and hand the sandwiches to the people in the cabin, the driver and the conductor. So that's what I remember about Victory Day, being lifted up, which of course you could do when I was little, but not when I'm the size I am now. And it was thrilling and exciting, and I found it quite moving to talk about, actually.
And obviously it was a day of celebration, but I suppose it must also be quite a painful day because you lost members of your family in the Holocaust, I believe.
I did lose members of my family, but the thing is, I didn't know that. I didn't find that out until about 60 or 70 years later, because I was doing my genealogical research and I found out that people had died. And when I think about that, of course, it makes me terribly sad. But when I was little and enjoying the fun of the celebrations, the euphoria that certainly transmitted itself from the adults to me, I didn't know anything about that.
Do you think at that time, am I right in saying you were 3 years old? Do you think at that time you understood what a big moment it was?
I understood because Mummy and Daddy told me. But I think I was 4. I was born in 41, in May. So Victory Day would have been in 45. So would I have been 4? I think I would have been 4.
Yeah,
and I knew a lot more at 4 than I did at 5.
And I suppose looking back now, all those years ago, that was a day of hope, a day of peace in Europe. But right now there is war in Europe. There are escalating tensions between 2 nuclear powers in India and Pakistan. Do you think the lessons that were learned back then live on or not?
Clearly, we've learnt nothing. I've never been so depressed and despairing about external events as I am now. I see the world in ferment. I see countries making the wrong choices for their leaders and for their activities. And I feel that we may be on the brink of another war. And of course, it makes me terribly sad and scared.
Do you think that's because the memory of VE Day and what happened is getting further away?
It is getting further away because we're all getting older. I'm going to be 84 on May the 18th. So, and I don't think we ever do learn anything. And we're turning, I'm on the left politically. Am I allowed to say that? I hope so, because it's true. And everywhere else, except my dear Australia, seems to be turning to the right. And I'm not in favour of that at all.
While we've got you, I also want to ask you about Israel, because you're Jewish, but you have been very critical of what has been happening in Gaza. Do you think the government here has taken the right approach?
No, I don't. I think that to accept the definition of anti-Semitism as meaning that you can't criticise Israel is disgraceful. I think what's happening in Israel is shocking. What's happening to the people, the Palestinian people, as a human being, I'm just appalled. I weep about it quite often, and I do get messages, often from my relatives, to say they find my stance disgusting and disgraceful and all the other words that I won't say on your programme. But the humanity seems to have gone out of the world. And I think it was there when I was little. No, I'm utterly shocked and ashamed of what the Israeli government is doing, and I don't understand why more isn't being done by the international community, which is what I suppose you call it, to prevent the killing of I don't care whether they're members of Hamas or not. You don't kill children. You don't deprive people of medical equipment and power. It's wrong. It's just wrong. And whether I'm Jewish or not makes no difference. I'm a human being, and that's how I react.
I should make clear, Israel say that their main goal is to remove the threat of Hamas and that they have not deliberately targeted any civilian targets. But I guess what would you like Keir Starmer to be actually doing right now?
I don't know what I would like him to be doing, but I'd like him to issue a statement to say that he loathes the choices that the Israeli government have made, and to say that we, the UK, will send in doctors and medical equipment and medicine to help the people who have no hospitals left. Never mind the rest of it. I mean, what's the matter with everybody? And at the moment, Gaza is just one big heap of rubble. And for the disgusting president of the US to say that he wants to build hotels there, that's something I think that Starmer should come out about. But, people care about money, and of course they do. I love money too, but I don't love money more than life.
There's a lot going on in the world at the moment, so there's a few things I would like to ask you about, if you don't mind. You obviously played Professor Sprout in Harry Potter, I'm sure.
What do you mean, obviously? What do you mean,
obviously? We all know that. I want to ask you about, obviously we've had that Supreme Court ruling. I'm sure you know about J.K. Rowling's views on transgender issues. We had that Supreme Court ruling last month. What was your reaction to that? Because you have expressed solidarity with the transgender community.
I just want people to be able to be themselves. I don't want women to be under threat, particularly not in the loo. I mean, I've been in the loo when a bloke has been looking over the barrier between the two stalls, and I thought, no, well, I'm not going to go there. But I don't agree with JK on this issue. I think that transgender, and there's so few of them, really, tiny proportion of people are transgender, and it's a horrible position for people to be in, I think, to be unwelcome, either from one side or the other. Let's just be nice to people. I do believe in humanity. As I've got older, and I'm very old now, and not long probably on this earth, let us be kinder. And I think there's something unkind going on at the moment, and I don't like that.
Miriam Margolyes, thank you so much for talking to us on such a range of subjects. There's a lot going on. So thank you. It's always fascinating to speak to you. So thank you very much.
Dear girl, thank you.
Speed on all the day's other stories. Let's go that first.
Thanks, Wilfred. Israel has killed at least 18 people in a strike on a hospital in Gaza. The Israeli military has also issued evacuation orders for 3 ports in Yemen. Let's go live to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. Alistair, bring viewers up to date. What's the latest in Gaza that we're hearing?
Well, there's been heavy attacks over the last 24 hours. Early yesterday morning, a hospital, the Nasser hospital, was hit. At least 2 people killed, including a Palestinian journalist in that attack. And then late yesterday evening, the pictures you're seeing here was the attack on the European hospital, not far away, both of the hospitals being in Khan Yunis. And, that series of kind of explosions and the smoke rising, the IDF saying they were attacking an underground complex that was a Hamas command and control center. And we're told that they had intelligence that Mohammed Sinwar was there. Mohammed Sinwar, the younger brother of Yahya Sinwar, who was the leader of Hamas, killed last October. Mohammed assumed the role of leading Hamas within Gaza itself. Hamas say that he wasn't there. He is still alive. The IDF haven't confirmed one way or another, but at least 18 people killed in that strike on that hospital, and a lot of the hospital also very badly damaged, on top of the fact they have been living through almost 19 months of war, and medical supplies are running dangerously low.
Alistair, while you're here, the Israeli military issuing evacuation orders for 3 ports in Yemen. What do we know there?
Yeah, this was in the last few minutes. I suspect that is in response to some Houthi attacks that have been coming in here over the last 12 hours. What was it, about 8 o'clock yesterday evening, there were air raid sirens across central Israel, including here in Jerusalem, as a ballistic missile was fired towards the area. And then again this morning, about 7:30 this morning, more air raid sirens. So a number of Houthi attacks, which I think is probably what has prompted Israel. Well, they look as though they're about to take action in Yemen. Of course, we know that the Americans have pulled back from that. They've struck a deal with the Houthis, so the Americans are no longer attacking them, and the Houthis say that they won't attack Red Sea shipping, but the Houthis have said they will continue attacking Israel as long as the war in Gaza continues, and that is exactly what they've been doing over the last couple of days.
All right, Alistair, thanks so much.
Mr. President, members of the Council, briefing you again on this subject is a grim undertaking. Before starting, I ask you to reflect for a moment on what action we will tell future generations we each took to stop the 21st century atrocity to which we bear daily witness in Gaza. It is a question we will hear, sometimes incredulous, sometimes furious, but always there for the rest of our lives. We will surely all claim to have been against it. Maybe we will say we issued a statement, or that we trusted that private pressure might work despite so much evidence to the contrary. Or pretend that we thought a more brutal military offensive had more chance of bringing the hostages home than the negotiations which brought so many hostages home. Maybe some will recall that in a transactional world, we had other priorities. Or maybe we will use those empty words, we did all we could. Mr. President, let me start with what we see and are mandated by this Council to report. Israel is deliberately and unashamedly imposing inhumane conditions on civilians in the occupied Palestinian territory. For more than 10 weeks, nothing has entered Gaza, no food, medicine, water, or tents. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have again been forcibly displaced and confined into ever-shrinking spaces, as 70% of Gaza's territory is either within Israeli militarized zones or under displacement orders. As my colleague from the FAO will explain, every single one of the 2.1 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip face the risk of famine. 1 in 5 face starvation. Despite the fact that you have funded the food that could save them. The few hospitals that have somehow survived bombardment are overwhelmed. The medics who have somehow survived drone and sniper attacks cannot keep up with the trauma and the spread of disease. Even today, the European Gaza hospital in Khan Yunis was bombed again, with even more civilian casualties reported. I can tell you from having visited what's left of Gaza's medical system that death on this scale has a sound and a smell that does not leave you. As one hospital worker described it, children scream as we peel burnt fabric from their skin. And yet we hear that we did all we could. Mr. President, our response as humanitarians is to make a single ask of the Council. Let us work. The UN and our partners are desperate to resume humanitarian aid at scale across Gaza, in line with the fundamental principles of humanity, impartiality, independence, and neutrality. We have a plan. We have shown we can deliver, with tens of thousands of trucks reaching civilians during the ceasefire. We have life-saving supplies ready now at the borders. We can save hundreds of thousands of survivors. We have rigorous mechanisms to ensure our aid gets to civilians and not to Hamas. But Israel denies us access, placing the objective of depopulating Gaza before the lives of civilians. It is bad enough that the blockade continues. How do you react when Israeli ministers boast of it? Or when attacks on humanitarian workers and violations of the UN's privileges and immunities continue, along with restrictions on international and non-governmental organizations? Mr. President, this Council has adopted resolutions that demand all parties to the conflict comply with international humanitarian law and protection of civilians, including humanitarian personnel. A reminder that Israel also has clear obligations under international humanitarian law. It must treat civilians humanely, with respect for their inherent human dignity. It must not forcibly transfer, deport, or displace the civilian population of an occupied territory. As the occupying power, it must agree to aid and facilitate it. So for anyone still pretending to be in any doubt, the Israeli-designed distribution modality is not the answer. It practically excludes many, including people with disabilities, women, children, the elderly, the wounded. It forces further displacement. It exposes thousands of people to harm. It sets an unacceptable precedent for aid delivery, not just in the OPT, but around the world. It restricts aid to only one part of Gaza, while leaving other dire needs unmet. It makes aid conditional on political and military aims. It makes starvation a bargaining chip. It is a cynical sideshow, a deliberate distraction, a fig leaf for further violence and displacement. If any of that still matters, have no part in it. Mr. President, for the record, we have tried. The UN has met 12 times, and again this morning, with the Israeli authorities to discuss this proposed modality. We wanted to find a way to make it possible. We repeatedly explained the minimum conditions for our involvement on the basis of long-settled fundamental principles. Aid based on independent assessments of who needs it, the globally tested and donor-demanded basic requirement, and the ability to deliver aid to all those in need, wherever they are. The Secretary-General set out the relevant international law in his submissions to the International Court of Justice. And your resolutions have strongly condemned starvation of civilians as a method of warfare and the unlawful denial of humanitarian access. Resolution 2417 demands the Council's full attention to widespread conflict-induced food insecurity. Mr. President, it's not just Gaza. Appalling violence is also increasing in the West Bank, where the situation is the worst in decades. The use of heavy weaponry, military methods of war, excessive force, forcible displacement, demolitions and movement restrictions. Ongoing illegal settlement expansion. Entire communities destroyed, refugee camps depopulated. Settlements expanding and settler violence continuing at alarming levels. Sometimes with the support of Israeli forces. Recently, settlers abducted a 13-year-old girl and her 3-year-old brother. They were found tied to a tree. Do we also say to them that we did all we could? Mr. President, there is, I fear, a broader context here. For the past 19 months, Palestinian journalists, civil society, and individuals have live-streamed their destruction to the world. Many have been targeted and killed for their testimony. And during this time, international aid workers have been the only international civilian presence in Gaza, watching and reporting the unfolding horror. We are your eyes and your ears. And be in no doubt that we feel the weight of that responsibility to you, to the communities we serve, and to the world. And so we have briefed this council in great detail on the extensive civilian harm that we witness daily: death, injury, destruction, hunger, disease, torture, other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, repeated displacement on a large scale. We have described the deliberate obstruction of aid operations and the systematic dismantling of Palestinian life and that which sustains it in Gaza. So you have that information. And now the ICJ is considering whether a genocide is taking place in Gaza. It will weigh the testimony that we have shared, but it will be too late. Recognizing the urgency, the ICJ has indicated clear provisional measures that must be implemented now, yet they have not. Previous reviews of the UN's conduct in cases of large-scale violations of international human rights and humanitarian law, reports on Myanmar 2019, Sri Lanka 2012, Srebrenica, Rwanda, both in 1999, pointed to our collective failure to speak to the scale of violations while they were committed. So for those killed and those whose voices are silenced, what more evidence do you need now? Will you act decisively to prevent genocide and to ensure respect for international humanitarian law? Or will you say instead that we did all we could? Mr. President, this degradation of international law is corrosive and infectious. It is undermining decades of progress on rules to protect civilians from inhumanity and the violent and lawless among us who act with impunity. Humanity, the law, and reason must prevail. This council must prevail. Demand this ends. Stop arming it. Insist on accountability. To the Israeli authorities, stop killing and injuring civilians. Lift this brutal blockade. Let humanitarians save lives. To Hamas and other armed Palestinian groups, release all hostages immediately and unconditionally. Stop putting civilians at risk during military operations. And for those who will not survive what we fear is coming, in plain sight, it will be no consolation to know that future generations will hold us in this chamber to account. But they will. And if we have not seriously done all we could, then we should fear that judgment.